Hello, everyone. First of all, please check your audios and let me know, can you hear us properly? I hope everything is okay with your audio sound.
I'm okay.
Catherine?
Yes, I am. Can
Great.
you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Dear all, welcome to this unique webinar that deals with Laban notation. My name is Alexander Ilic and program leader at the Belgrade Dance Institute. Belgrade Dance Institute is the only higher educational institution that deals with dance in Serbia. We have classical dancers, contemporary and national dance, choreography and pedagogy from BA all the way through the PhD levels. We study many aspects of dance, movement and performance. And as a part of our education mission, we promote various projects. Bonjour tout le monde. Je voudrais vous présenter Catherine. Elle fait partie des personnes formidables qui ont travaillé sans relâche pour que ce webinaire vous soit présenté. Et maintenant, sans plus tarder, je voudrais laisser Catherine vous parler du Teatroskop et pourquoi je pense que vous devriez tous être conscients de cette merveilleuse organisation. I would like to introduce Catherine. She is one of the great people that has worked tirelessly so that this webinar is brought to you. And now, without further ado, I would like to let Catherine tell you all about Teatroskop and why I think you should all be aware of this wonderful organization.
Hello, everyone. I am Catherine Faudry, so I am the cultural attaché at the French Institute and the French Embassy in Belgrade, and I run Teatroskop program with Tanya Gavrilovic, my colleague, Tanya Gavrilovic. She's here with us. She coordinates this webinar and she will answer questions as well. Then we are very pleased to organize this first webinar with Belgrade Dance Institute, and thank you, Alexander Ilic. And we are especially very interested in organizing it in the framework of Teatroskop program. Let me tell you a few words about the program and why this webinar is so important for us. Teatroskop was created 9 years ago by the French Ministries of Foreign Affairs and of Culture and by the French Institute in Paris. And it was created in order to strengthen professional networks in the Southeast Europe, from Hungary to Turkey, including all the country in between. Our main purpose is to support artistic collaborations in this region, and to support as well exchanges of expertise and all the links between the region and the French artistic scene. You can check, if you want, you can check more details on our website and or on the social networks. You will see all the projects that we support and what kind of actions we want to do with all of you and with all the partners. We work with a large range of partners in the region, from independent venues to festivals, and of course with institutions as well. And we have a special focus on dance, on contemporary circus as well, on puppetry and on young audience projects. And with this webinar, we tried to invent new ways to maintain the contact and to share experiences and ideas in the region. And we hope that this webinar will be the first in a series, and that it will be very useful for the French scene and for the Southeast Europe performing arts scene as well. As you know, and as you will all agree, this scene, the performing arts scene, has been strongly impacted by the pandemic crisis, and we want to reaffirm you all that we will be all supporting you as much as possible, and no matter what happens in the future. So many thanks to Belgrade Dance Institute, many thanks to Alexander, and many thanks to Raphaël Cottin, of course, for his strong expertise and his amazing energy. And thank you all for being with us today, and enjoy the session. See you soon.
Thank you, Catherine. Before we start, I just want to aware you that there is a chat position on your right or left side. I don't know how your just perspective. And for all questions or doubt, or if you have any worries about connection, please write there, because there is a Tanya Gavrilovic from Teatroskop and Jelena Ilic from Belgrade Dance Institute that they will manage all problems. Second thing, I would like to thanks to Catherine and the Teatroskop and French Institute in Serbia for organizing this webinar. And now we are coming to Raphaël Cottin, who is actually the most important for this webinar, dancer, choreographer, teacher, and notator in Kinetography Laban, interest in choreographic creation, as in the studio of movement of Laban, trained at the Conservatoire de Paris in past century, and here is studying teaching from great names in classical and contemporary dance, such as Wilfried Pollitt and Jean, I'm sorry about the names, Peter Goss, Odile and André Lafont. We are very happy to deal in these two webinars with Raphaël Cottin. And most important thing, for the next webinar for tomorrow, you just need to be registered as you are registered for this today webinar. And now I'm giving the word for the Raphaël Cottin. Hello, Raphaël.
Hello, Alexander. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and for having the curiosity of discovering for most of you what are Laban tools. Je fais une petite introduction française pour saluer mes collègues français puisque j'en vois certains déjà sur la partie chat et les personnes qui sont là. Bonjour à tous. So, we have more or less 35 minutes in order to present this this large, very large subject. So I will need to share my screen. Yes, that's. Does it work? Yes, it works. So during this first part, so today, it will be more a global presentation of what are those tools Laban initiated. It was not the only one who created those tools, it was the initiator of it. So most of the time, Laban created something that other people So the aim of this first hour together is to present you a kind of historical survey before speaking of Laban himself and his notation and analysis of movement tools. I would like to introduce you to the question of writing and dancing together with an historical aspect, can I say, when for the dialogue between dance and writing in dance history, in most of the time Western dance history. As you can see in the main screen, you have a presentation of bass dance. It's a dance from the 15th century, and you will see. Yes, do you see my mouse? Here, we have notes here, like music score, here and there. And behind we have letters. And on those letters, it refers to the steps that we need to do during the music. And that was a part of, that was one of the main purpose at that time, to remember what should be done on a music score and to summarize or to shorten a few letters here and there in order to associate dance and music together. And we can see on that other image a music score on the left side and description of the step on the right side. And it's a fact that we can generalize the period between the 15th century until today. Most of the time, people interested in connection between music and dance, people interested in writing movement, invented system of notation, putting together music and dance. Here in that image, you can see Feuilet notation in the 18th century. It's a period very rich in France, in Italy, in Western Europe, because at that time, Louis XIV became a kind of absolute monarch in France, and he turned dance and arts in general into political tools. I really need to insist on that fact because we can realize that at that time, dance was as important as diplomacy, as important as swords, as huntings, as every kind of important aspect of the political life at that time. And it was important for the French kingdom to spread the French culture. So because the political idea was to spread French culture, it was important to fix something that will be easily spread in Europe. So at that time, Louis XIV created a lot of academy, a lot of conservatory, should I say, that will allow people to spread music, to spread culture, to spread French letters, literacy, etc. So after a few years came that system of notation called Feuilet notation system. And you can see it as if we were from above. It's a kind of map when the traveling paths of the dancer are written from above. And all the tiny little signs that are written left or right side on the center line represent what to do with the right step, with the right foot or with the left foot. So again, it's an association between the music score that you can see on the top of the sheet and the dance score on the bottom. Another reflection from me is to realize that at that time, you learned not alone, you learned with a maître à danser, with a teacher, and at the same time, you learned with a score. So there wasn't any difference between reading and moving. That's why it's really a fact that is revolutionary at that time, because people needed to read and to move before moving alone. As you can see, I put a few examples of other later notation systems like sténochoregraphie of Arthur Saint-Léon in France, again, at the late 19th century, or the French system Pierre Comté in the early 20th century. And here again, you can see clearly a connection between musical notation and dance notation, because some systems very look like notes, but all this in the bottom with Pierre Comté notation system are not notes of music. They are a kind of vocabulary to explain flexion here, the flexion of the legs. But always there's a connectivity often with music score and notation system. The last example, The last example with Benesh notation, who came from England. It's a system created in the 50s by Rudolf Benesh, who worked with someone at the Royal Academy of Dance in England. And it was a system created to help the company to rehearse, to remember the steps, to remember the repertoire, and to help them to rehearse. So again, with this system, I won't explain it because I'm not a specialist in Benesh notation, but you can see 5 lines, and it is written as in music from left to right, with a score that can be put together, the movement score and the music score at the same time. Then when we came back to the Feuilet notation system, we can realize that the design of the steps and the design of the movement is very different from the musical score. It can't go at the same time going together. It's very two separate things. That's why I ask you the question. It's not a question for myself, it may be a question for you. What does this relationship between dance and writing on paper teach us? As I said before, it's maybe a connection between reading, remembering, practicing, and dancing. And it's also a way, of course, to spread the knowledge, to spread the vocabulary, to learn some dance that we need to know. I am Marquis de je ne sais pas quoi, and I need to come to visit the king. And before my visit, I need to learn some dance. So I receive the score, I learn the dance with my chair, and I came in front of the king, and then I dance. First remark, first comment. Second, what is special, what is specific about this system? I think there is 2 main questions about this system of writing movement on papers. What is specific, and why didn't they last over time? Why didn't they are still alive today and active today? I think that Benesh notation, not Benesh notation, sorry, Feuilet notation dedicated to Baroque dance is a system that is still alive today, but only for Baroque dance. As you can see, but you don't know it, but I explain you a little bit. I am waiting because I have a connection that is starting again. It's okay. So this sheet of paper represents the flow works, the flow pathway of the dancer. And on Feuilet notation, you know what to do about stepping. So with the steps, you know what to do. But at that time, you weren't, all the arm movements were improvised. You need to do specific steps, but you need to connect them with free arm movement, very codified, but who needed to be improvised at the same time. So that's why this system of notation records only the steps, not the upper body movement. It's interesting because later, in other parts of history, when people want to record what happens with the upper body movements, with my head, with my fingers, for instance, the system wasn't ready to do that. And most of the time, the system created before the 20th century was what I called contextual systems. System connected to a specific style or to a specific context of dance. It's a kind of cultural system that is gone really with Feuilet and Baroque dance, for instance. So when people want to focus on different ways of analyzing movements, of writing movements, and Rudolf Laban was one of those people, he needed to ask for himself what to do in order to give dance a tool that could be alive for a very long time, not depending on a cultural context, not depending on a specific style. So this is one of the main questions that Laban needed to challenge with. It was to invent something that is disconnected from any culture or any style. I will come again on that fact, of course, during a long moment tomorrow. So, Rudolf Laban, who is he? Where does he come from? Rudolf Laban, Rudolf von Laban, was born in 1879 in Bratislava, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Most of the main part of his life after going to France for a short study in Beaux-Arts, he came to do his career in Germany between the 20s and the 30s. Between 1910 and 1915 and 1936, first part in Germany. After 1936, he moved to England when he arrived exactly in 38, I think, and he stayed in England until his death in 1958. So that's for the chronology of Rudolf Laban. So you can realize that at that time, of course, there was 2 World Wars. So that's not a light fact. It's an important fact. And at that time, there is a lot of rich elaboration in Europe in art. Also, especially, of course, between 19 and 1910, between 1910 and 1930, there are specific chapters in dance history and more generally in cultural history that are very important to create what we call now modern dance or modern art. So why is he interested in writing movements? I should say, why first is he interested in movements? His father was a military man, but he was not disconnected at all with the dance life, because at that time he often danced himself. He often see traditional dance in Central Europe, where, as you already know, because we have a lot of people from Central Europe today, there are a lot of rich cultural heritage of traditional dance in Central Europe. So Rudolf Laban was very used to see dance, to love dance, and to practice dance himself. So during his life, Rudolf Laban developed and initiated many different areas of movement. That's why I want to end this webinar this morning to present those different tools that he has created. But tomorrow we will focus on only one. So it's important to realize that depending on the part of his life, at each part, he had different interests, because it was in different contexts, it was with different peoples, and each time it brings something new to the dance life. It's not chronological because some tools are connected one to each other, but in order to present you the main aspects of this creation, we can remember, of course, movement notation, that is one of his first interests, not the first one, but one of the first interests. I know that Marion Bastien from France is listening to us. This is a present from Marion Bastien Library, an exemplary of choreography, a book of Laban in 1926, I think, when he proposed some new graphs of new system of notation that is not the same as the one he has developed later. But we can see in that important book called Choreography, is very questioned, he questioned, he challenged all the aspects of analyzing at the same time the human movement in the world and how to record it. It's not really disconnected. There is practicing movement, so inventing exercises, inventing what he will call scales of movement, and at the same time recording it. So find a way of writing these rules in order to work on them, in order to analyze them. So first field, the movement notation that he will call in the 20s Kinetography Laban, that is known already in some Anglo-Saxon country as Laban notation. It's the same thing. When you can hear sténochoregraphia, kinetography or Laban notation, it's really the same field, the same topic. On the other hand, there is what I call analysis of the harmony of the body in space, what Laban called choreotics. Is a field, a realm, a real wide realm, when Laban observe and analyze the connection between the space around us and the space inside us. So the connection, when you can see, for instance, like that, I want to catch something here up high, and I realize that my other leg, my opposite leg, here you can see, yeah, my opposite leg is in the opposite direction. You realize the connection between space, like between up and down, between one side and the other side. And he analyzed all the harmonic aspect of it in a way as if we were analyzing movement as we analyze harmony in music. It's kind of comparative. Last, what I called analysis of movement dynamics is a tool that Laban created very early, but developed in the last year of his life, especially in the 40s in England and the 40s and 50s in England, what he called eukinetics. Eukinetics is a way of not recording the movement to describe it and to remember it. It's a way of observing and practicing, experimenting the dynamic aspect of movement. So with this tool called eukinetics, that will be called later effort, it's more a question of observation of the connection between one factor of movement and us. So for instance, what is my relation to space? How do I feel space when I move? How do I build connection with my weight? Or how do I play with the flow of movements when I move? So this last tool called eukinetics or effort now is more a question of relationship between oneself and the connection with movement factors in terms of dynamics. Now regarding kinetography with Laban notation, the movement notation, As I told you before, the challenges for Laban is to build something strong, to help dance to have strong tools, because he wanted dance to be recognized as a major art. So he thought that building strong tools for arts, it will be an help for dance to be recognized first. Second, he wanted to create, as I told before, something durable in time. That means disconnected from a specific style or specific culture. It was focusing on human movement. So more than a dance system of notation, I should say that Laban's system of movement notation is a movement notation, is a human movement notation, not a dance movement notation. It's very important because, in fact, he spent more than 20 years of building, of making this system. So it's not something invented in a few months or even in a few years. And he was very focused on fundamentals of the human elements, our verticality, our relationship to gravity, the way we are symmetric with a right side and a left side, something like that. 5 minutes, maybe. To end, I propose to you a few examples of different way of different example of scores, of dance notation, of movement notation, just in order for you to realize what could be a work, a curiosity between a dancer practitioner and a sheet of paper. Here you have an old dance score, what we called movement core, what was called in German Bewegungschor. It's a movement for amateur people, so it's really invented for everyone, not for dance specialists. So at that time, with this example from the 30s, you realize that it wasn't done to be a specialist tool. It was done to be spread to anyone, to be not too complicated to read. And you will see tomorrow that with a few explanations, you will be able to read a score. With only 1 hour, you will be able to read examples. So it's one of the other challenge of Laban to invent something simple. So it looks complicated because it looks new. But when you have the clue, when you have the K, you understand that this is a system based on big fundamentals, so not too complicated. Another example here of a Japanese traditional dance here. So we can work also with a very specific culture from today or from yesterday. And it helps as well dancer, teacher, or researcher at university or anthropologist, for instance. With this other example, it's an example from Irmgard Bartenieff Fundamentals. It was written by Jacqueline Chalet-Haas and Angela Loureiro. So score could be also a tool for specific class, for specific technique, not in order to write or to notate a work or a piece of repertoire, but also to dance and to practice technique or just exercises, for instance. Last year, there is another score of a contemporary creation, a piece from French choreographer Thomas Lebrun in 2017. And as you can see, sometimes when when it is useful, we can also put together a Laban notation score and music score. But as you can see, and we will explain it tomorrow, this system is based on the verticality of the human body, so the score is read from above to the top, is read vertically with a left side and a right side. I think it is enough for my long speech, and now we can open the discussion for the question and answers. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Raphael. I just would like to remind all of you guys, for all questions, please use the question tab that you have upstairs. So for all questions, that Raphael just can go through that. Thank you, Raphael.
Alors, I'm reading some question, and if any one of the staff can help me to select question, I would be pleased. I need to read a little bit. So yes, score are ranked from bottom to the top. Sometimes applied. I think everyone can read with me the questions that you can focus on some question from people. Alors, I will ask to Veronika Kufalova, who asked this here, live answer, okay. So I have seen that kinetography sometimes applies used in research of pixology of movement and non-verbal behavior, or in dance movement psychotherapy. What makes kinetography relevant in this context? As I said a few moments ago, kinetography was developed in order to analyze any kind of human movement. For that reason, when the system grew up, because at the beginning it was interested by dance people, but year after year, it was connected to other fields, and it's a system that I met other interests from researchers, from anthropologists, and also from people from a more medical world. Or I am particularly thinking of Irmgard Bartenieff in the United States, that will be connected to what is called now, a few years later, dance therapy. It's not a question of kinetography itself, because as you maybe understood, there are a lot of Laban areas, but specifically with kinetography, asking for yourself or observing with other people what they are doing, you can observe the space they are occupying. You can observe specific areas, you can observe specific parts. If some people don't use the limbs, if I'm waiting for connection to be okay. So when I don't, if I notate something, I can see it. And one example for that, I am working since 2 years with a psychiatric hospital with children with a psychiatric disease. Kinetography helped me to give them specific rules that are not emotional tools. To say fit, to say stand up or sit down is something distant from an emotional aspect most of the time, not always, because you can't disconnect, but you take the problem or you take the subject from an objective side, and you realize there are connections with emotional aspects, but you take the topic from another side. So in that way, it interests a lot people from that kind of work.
Okay, there is a question from Rafael Augusto Arruda Melo. Where can we download the scores by Knus and others you have shown, Rafael, in your presentation?
Sorry, can you repeat? I wasn't listening. I was reading something else.
Absolutely. There is a question from Rafael Augusto Arruda Melo, where we can download the scores by Knus and others you have shown in your presentation.
Alors, specifically about Knus notation, Albrecht Knus was one of close colleagues of Laban in Germany in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. A huge fount of Knus documentation is the Centre National de la Danse in Pantin in France, but you've got a very simple link that I can add to the chat, which is cnd.fr. On cnd.fr, you've got the media library of the Centre National de la Danse, and every document of score from Knus found is available for free. So it's a great heritage because it's also something built to be spread. And it's really a question of spreading knowledge. So that part, of course, on the National Dance Center in France, who has a lot of scores, not only Knus scores, and otherwise the main places when you can find scores or documentation, I should recommend, of course, Centre National de la Danse Media Library first, and Dance Notation Bureau in New York. It's not a real library you can come in and take documents, but it's a huge center for a resource. So you can dialogue with Mei Chen Lu, who is probably with us today, and because there is a huge amount of American, not only American, but most of the scores are from North America, but there's also score from Japan. I think the Japanese traditional dance came from DNB, and also a large repertoire. I'm thinking of Doris Humphrey repertoire, a huge Doris Humphrey, Georges Balanchine, also young choreographers. And I should add that Centre National de la Danse in France help a lot new score to be read, to be created, to be made. So since 10 or 15 years now, the French state, via the Centre National de la is helping, is founding, is giving money to people like me in order to write scores of new pieces.
Okay, thank you. There is also questions from Tamara Yassar. Do you think that Laban notation can be universal for any kind of dance, or it must be changed for specific dance? For example, should it be the same for classical ballet or traditional dance?
For all the question of style or specificity, for instance, in ballet, most of the time you've got straight lines with legs with straightness. All this, you describe the specificity of each movement in a glossary. But the main aspect, it doesn't change the system itself because the rules are the same. As I said, because it's a question of human movement, rising an arm up is rising an arm up. And you can, of course, precise with my arm if it's straight like that, or turn out, or soft, or more flexed, but it is still my right arm up. So, so it's not a question of precision, because with Laban system of notation, we can be very precise, like this, or like batterie in ballet dance, for instance, which is, it's not a question of complexity. It's a question of choice. because when you've got fundamentals in movement analysis, you can analyze it as detailed as you want. What is delicate, what is more complex to do, is to choose what to write. I can choose one example because it's opening the space for us for the session of tomorrow. When I'm doing this is to raise my arm forward, I can just say, put my right arm forward. I can also specify if there is a specific rotation of my arm, outward, inward. So I can do the two things at the same time, a little inward and raising my arm at the same time. I can also specify the direction of my palm. If I'm saying inside rotation, put my arm forward and finish with my palm facing at the opposite side, it will be thus, this. And so you can add specific things depending on how precise you want to be. So it's not a question of complexity that allows the system to be universal, because you need to choose each time. If you write something very global, very simple, like walking, or there is notation of people moving in the subway, or if you want to notate Balizian or Indian dances with specific fingers, very codified, you need to be very precise. So it will become a more complex things to analyze, but it doesn't change the system itself.
Thank you. I think that you already started to answer on questions. Some people think Laban analysis of movement reach only European, American bodies and cultures. Is there the necessity to improve his research in order to contemplate all human bodies? What do you think, Raphaël?
I think it's really a question of politics and culture at the same time, because we can see during, I haven't told you the story of why Laban left Germany in '36. Most of the time we live in a cultural context that allowed us to practice or to study in the way we want. At one moment, Joseph Goebbels in Germany decided that it was too dangerous to allow Rudolf Laban to continue his work. And from one day to the other day, he said stop. And at that time, after '36, all Laban schools, there were huge amounts of Laban schools at that time in Germany, they were closed. Laban technique was forbidden, and he needed to move in another place. And then, when he arrived in England, he bring what he has built.
Okay.
What I should say just to end is that with his colleagues, he was not alone. I'm waiting just a bit. Connection failed. Yes, it's coming again. So meet people. People are taking the tools and bring them to their own culture. For kinetography, you have several people from different culture and different places who brings notation in different places. Roderick Lange in Poland, Maria Sempal in Hungary, Anne Hutchinson in the United States and in England, and others and others. There's many examples of that. So each time you bring a tool and you see how the tool can serve your culture and your context. And as a tool, it needs to adapt to a specific area. I don't know if I am answering the question exactly, but...
Okay, there is another question. Is the kinetography registering the emotional aspects involved in movement somehow?
I should say that it's kind of the same question as we can ask the same question in literacy. When you invent something and you decide to write it down, you can analyze what was written down. I shouldn't talk about national things, but for sure I can have in my mind very different fields with a specific time in history, with specific styles that are not written like, look, this is here. But for instance, you've got Martha Graham. No, I'm thinking of Mary Wigman technique. When you see there's not scores of Mary Wigman dance, but we have a few scores of Mary Wigman exercises. And we can see with Mary Wigman exercises that there are a lot of what we call low-level weights. That means bending knees. And there are a lot of steps moving like that. Everything on the same level. It's not a question of nation, it's not a question of specific timing, but it's a kind of signature. It's a kind of film. We can recognize Wigman style, but we can also recognize that at that time, in this land, a lot of dance used low-level weight. So it's an anthropological question. It's more a question of studying what was done, but of course, each notation, each score reveals something from its author, from the choreographer, or from the country, from the history, etc. There are clues inside, but it's a question of work and analyze in another time.
There is one question between relation, I'm sorry, I lost this question, between Laban and Forsyth, for example, in the researching.
Can you say it again? Sorry, I was...
Yes, I'm sorry, I lost this question, but there is a relation between Laban and Forsyth, for example, in researching, so it's really interesting.
William Forsyth was very interested in the area Laban called choreotics, that harmony of movement, moving our three-dimensional aspect in the three-dimensional aspect of the room. So he worked, I say Forsyth, I've worked on what Laban called trace movement. What is the design in space that I live in the area when I'm moving? So when I do that, I trace some round movement, and at the end, maybe it will be close to a sphere, to a ball. When I'm dancing like this, it's more angular, it's more in a shape of pyramid or something like that. So the design of the body, depending on how I see the space and how I use the space when I move, I create different kind of relationship between the environment and me. So this was one of the interests directly taken from Laban to William Forsyth. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I see a question from my mother, so I need to answer it. How to introduce rhythm of music. So we will see that tomorrow because it's a technical question of the system itself. But the system is done in a way that it is proportional with timing. That means that because it is readable from bottom to the top, there will be sign in the score of different lengths. And the shorter the sign will be, the faster the movement will be. The longer the signs will be, the slower the movement will be. But we will be dealing with timing and rhythm in the session of tomorrow.
There is also one really interesting question. The notation applies to movements through space and time. What about energy? How do we apply that through notation, and does that affect the notation?
One of the most frequent question we are dealing with when we study notation at the beginning is a question of quality of movement. And it's short, there's a huge connection with dynamic. I should say that this question of quality or dynamic of movement, most of the time, it's a lack of analyzing time and space together. It's not the only aspect, but one of the first aspects when we start to practice and to use this tool of kinetography is to see what happened in space and time. And when we see more and more clearly after the work what happens in our body in terms of space and time, it's not disconnected because we cannot be in times without being in space. We cannot be in space without being in time because it's a question of movement. So when we realize that this is the main information in our body to move in a certain direction in a certain period of time, we realize that it gives us a lot of key for qualities and for dynamics. After, there's another question of level of energy in the movement. And what Laban proposed as a main fundamental of the system is that every information will be given with a normal amount of energy. But what means normal amount of energy? For instance, when I have 3 counts to move my arm here, and I do 1, 2, 3, and now I'm doing it faster, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But if I'm doing it just on 1, 1, and in this last example, I use more energy because the movement was faster, and I need to adapt my energy to the movement itself. So what Laban proposed is dynamic signs that give us information very rarely, very exceptional, just if I want to put in my movement less energy or more energy than a normal amount of energy. So if I need to do this without any energy, it's very difficult. But if it's written, it makes my arm a lot in order to do this. But it's very rare.
Okay, there is one technical question from Nikola Petrovic. Could you describe the best way to digitize and write Laban notation down through the PC? Me personally use Laban Notator as a software for that, but it doesn't work that good for me. Nor do I find the tools via AutoCAD quite helping. Do you have some suggestion?
Yeah. This is very a technical aspect, but I will answer it. In the 70s, I think, I don't know, in the 60s, there were just a part of history because it's interesting for anyone to realize how to write scores at the beginning. I can show you, yes, I can show you this. Partager, hop. Alors. I need to come back to this. You can see here it was done by hand. So everything at the beginning was written by hand. And now I can stop sharing. Up. Sorry. I come back. Here I am. Yes. Arrêtez le partage. So at the beginning, yes, yes, fine. At the beginning, everything was done by hand. Later, the society IBM helped notators to create what we call the IBM ball, specifically done for typewriters in order to have straight lines, diagonal lines, X, V, signs, dot, and everything was done like that. It was very long, very hard, because we need to be very precise. And if you weren't perfect, at the end, you need to do it again from the beginning, as if you were writing by hand. At the end, in the 70s, a specific software was created by Ohio State University called Laban Writer, specifically done for Macintosh. But today, thank you, Apple, for all the new software. It can't be used anymore because it bugs everywhere with the new softwares. But Laban Writer was a very efficient software who was very useful from the 70s until today. In PC, because there is not specific software for PC, there were Graph Laban and I don't know the one this man mentioned, Graph Laban, yes. Graph Laban and Calaban also, two specific software in the 80s and 90s, and the Hungarian researcher called János Fugedi in the Institute of Musicology in Budapest created an application for AutoCAD specifically dedicated to it. You can search Institute for Musicology Budapest Laban, and you will find it on Google for sure. In France, we are using software like Inkscape or Illustrator, who are specific software for design. And we use library of symbol that we are using by copy and paste. The last but interesting project that exists is a French computer designer called Sébastien Courvoisier that is starting a project to build a new software online dedicated to any Laban notator. So it should be done, he should work on these first steps of research during this year and the year 2021. And I don't have the link, but I can put the link online afterwards. It's always some kind of cheap solution to share with each other because it's not very well done. But Illustrator functions very well.
Okay, there is a last question because we are off with the time. It's from Vidura Amranand. Now that we can learn and keep dance and movement through video recording, do you think Laban notation is still useful or relevant in terms of keeping record of movement or repertory?
That's a very interesting question, and the answer is very simple as well, because what we are able to do now is to record everything, and a score of notation is not a recording. It's a movement, an order of movement written on paper. When you record a performance on stage, you will have the memory of the dancers. You will see the dancers, you will see the lights, you will see the costume design. So everything very important to have a trace and to testify what has been done specifically at that moment. But a notation card doesn't give you any interpretation. And in that sense, the relationship between dance and music and a score of dance is the same than the one with the score of music. The music is written on a score, but it's not a record of the music. It's what music is to be done. So with a score of dance, it's the same information. It just gives you what to do, but you need to work on it to find what to do. But it's not a question of interpretation because you don't have any dancer in real behind. And I should say that most of the time on video, for instance, when I need to do this, and it needs to be very precise because the choreographer wanted me to be very straight with my arm specifically at the same level with my shoulder. But at the time of the recording on stage, I did this. And so the recording will be this, but the true information were that. So most of the time, and it's one of the richness of performing arts, what people are doing live is, of course, just a little different from what is to be done in an ideal world. And what is written on a score is what to do, but how to do it, it's up to you to work. But of course, it's a question of choice, as I said before, in order to end this session. Notation is a translation of movement from an order of movement into symbols. It's very rare to have movement written first, then realized in a second part. Most of the time, you've got a dance to be translated into score, and a translation need to have a good translator. So, of course, we have different kinds of translation. We have different kinds of notators. So there are humanity in the score. It's not a computer thing that records the movement and write it down without affect.
Thank you very much, Raphaël. So,
thank you, Alex.
Would you like to say something for conclusion before we leave?
No, because this is a failed conclusion because we will meet again tomorrow, just in order to discover what is kinetography itself, what is Laban notation, how does it work. It will be the subject of tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to remind all of you to register for tomorrow webinar. The recording of today and tomorrow webinar will be posted on special link, and just follow all the emails about tomorrow webinar. Thank you very much for being part of this lection about Rudolf Laban, and see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.